staying power for a 75-year-old dead man. Okay, today, obviously, everybody's aware. Our one-man show, Greg Shepard, here as Henry Ford. Greg, you're on, sir.
Thank you. Good afternoon. I'm Henry Ford. I implemented and developed the first affordable, mass-produced automobile. The Ford Motor Company that I founded 120 years ago has produced some 100 million vehicles. Many of you have owned a Ford or driven in one. You'll find me to be a complex man, as I have a lot to offer to tell you today. In my lifetime, I was a husband, a father, a philanthropist, and inventor. I had 50 patents. A mechanic, a race car driver, a businessman, leader, innovator, and entrepreneur. And I was complex in that, thank you, appreciate that. Complex in that I was a very opinionated man, and I like to do things my way, like to be in control, like to take on risks, and like to have a lot of fun. So, let's just start. I was born July 30th, 1863 in Greenville Township, Michigan, which is in Wayne County, near Dearborn, Michigan. My parents, William and Mary Ford, had a 200-acre farm that was fairly prosperous. And once again, here's my father, my mom, here I am early. Here's my birthplace and a school I attended. Well, this is a better shot of my home. And here I am growing up as a baby, a toddler, and a young man. I was the oldest of 6 children, 4 survived. I grew up doing farm chores, and when bored, took apart my siblings' toys to see how they worked because I loved mechanical things. And I went to a one-room schoolhouse where I didn't read and write too well, but managed to graduate at age 13 in 1876 with a 6th grade education. And then at that same age 13, my dad gave me a pocket watch, which I promptly took apart and put back together. Soon I was able to fix, clean, and repair neighbors' watches and gained a local reputation as a watch repairman. My father disapproved of this and wanted me to do more farming, so I worked late at night in secret by candlelight with my own homemade tools to fix watches. I would later on repair watches as a hobby my whole life. Actually, I would spend my whole life trying to fix something. So, and here I am at my dad's farm. And at that same age, 13, my mom died. This so devastated me that it convinced me that farm living and farm chores were not in my future. At age 15, I made my own steam engine in a small little shed in back of my home. And at age 16, I ran away from home to Detroit, where I became an apprentice machinist for 1 year with one company, and then went to a dry dock boat company to be a machinist apprentice there. My salary was $2.50 a week. My room and board was $3.50 a week, so I repaired watches at a local jewelry shop at night to make ends meet. And at age 19 in 1882, my dad called me back to the farm and offered me 40 acres to farm it. Instead, I built a sawmill on the land and repaired local farmers' farm machinery. And I became very good at fixing and operating a Westinghouse portable steam thresher. The Westinghouse company noticed this and made me their service rep in the Michigan and Ohio areas. Then in 1885, I met Clara Bryant, and we became engaged in 1886 and married in 1888. It was the best day of my life marrying Clara. We would have one son named Edsel, born in 1893. Going back a bit, when we were first married, we lived in Detroit, and there I was doing 3 things. First, I was taking some business courses at a local community college. Secondly, I was working for Detroit Edison, or Edison Illuminating Company, as an engineer, making $45 a month. And then I became supervisor, shown here, making $125 a month in 1893. And third, I like to tinker around in my spare time with gas-powered engines, which were all the rage then. See, the first car was made in 1885 by Karl Benz, a German engineer, and became better adapted and more popular in 1890. And in the early 1890s, I met Thomas Edison, and he encouraged my ideas to build my own car. And here I am designing it, and in 1896, I built the quadricycle, which is a gas-powered internal combustion machine. It was a cross between a golf cart and a dune buggy. It weighed 500 pounds, it was mounted on 4 bicycle tires. Here's the crank to start it, a horn/bell, a headlight, and a steering lever. Its engine, shown here in a blow-up here, had 2 cylinders and 5 horsepower. Here's the gear shift here, first gear 10 mph, second 20, with no reverse gear. And I built this in a work shed behind my home at the time. And I called Clara the believer. She was the only one to believe in my idea of making an affordable car for the American public. Later on in life, this is what it kind of looked like when later on when we had it, that I kept it. And here I am in Clara. And going back to this time, I drove it around the quadricycle around 1898, around Detroit about 1,000 miles. I put that in on her, but she proved to be unreliable. She tended to break down easily and was costly to repair. So I sold her for $200. At this point, I was labeled as a failure by my acquaintances, really a daydreaming mechanic who preferred to work on strange machines. Then in 1899, when I was 36, Detroit Edison and I had a meeting. And they said, Henry, we know you like working on your gas-powered machines. Actually, I love doing that because I was evolving them into race cars at the time, which was my passion. Or they said, you can be general superintendent of the entire power plant. Which is it? So I decided to quit my daytime job and make a go for it. So with the help of some local Detroit investors, I opened up the Detroit Automobile Company, which went bankrupt quickly. The same thing with the Henry Ford Automobile Company, belly up. But the third one in 1903, the Ford Motor Company, that's the one that worked. You see, failure is the opportunity to begin again, only more intelligently. However, when I opened my doors for business, I ran into a roadblock. And there was a cartel known as ALAM, Association of Licensed Automobile Manufacturers. And they held all the patent rights on all automobiles. And they put out these warnings saying, do not duplicate our cars by companies you well know today, like Cadillac, Olds Motor Works, Packard Motor Company, and the Winton Motor Carriage, which we'll get to. Simply said, if I was to make and sell my own car, I'd have to pay them a royalty for each car of a couple $100, making my car about $1,500, way out of the reach of the average Joe. And I was angry about this. However, I decided to do something about it instead. Since I was involving these race cars, I decided to challenge the owner of ALAM to a race. At least this way, I could get the public notice that I so needed. And the fastest race car driver of the day was Alexander Winton. And he not only owned the company, but he was the big deal in the day. If I could beat him, I get the business attention I so needed. The only problem was I never raced before. Well, in 1902, we met in Michigan on a dirt oval 1-mile track. The course was 10 times around. And at the beginning of the race, I was doing poorly. But I started catching up to him about lap 5 and 6 because I had an early form of fuel injection and had porcelain insulators, which are the forerunners of your spark plugs. And I was able to pass him at 72 mph and beat him. After the race, I went up to Winton and I said to him, "You got mud on your face, you're a big disgrace." And I kicked your can all over the place and saying, we will rock you, hoorah, Winton." And then he looked at me and he said, "Boy, kid, you're really acting like a drama queen." And then he told me that I had had too much Bohemian Rhapsody pie for lunch. Anyways, when winning this race, I got immediate national attention and became a folk hero. And I was able to attract investors. And I was able to get 1,000 investors within a year and able to raise $28,000. And with the help of a court order demolishing Alum, as well as help from the Dodge brothers, Horace and John, I was able to open a plant in Detroit on Mack Avenue to produce the Model A, which is a copy of a Ransom Olds car, had 4 cylinders. And we produced about 15 a day, by the way. And this is the sales office for us. I don't think it was a factory. And then I got involved during this time in racing cars. And I rented a shed in Detroit where I made some cars here. And my associates and I then developed 2 racing cars. And this is how we raced in those days, with no safety nets or anything. It was the 999 car, which I've shown here by it. She had 4 cylinders. And I got involved in racing then. These racing cars had 70 to 100 horsepower, and we went on 1-mile oval tracks, well over 60 miles an hour. We also tried and were trying to be successful at setting land speed records. And in 1904, we got up to 91 mph on flat ice. And we entered a continental race in 1909 that was from New York to Seattle and took 22 days to complete. Going back to this time a bit, during the next 5 years, from 1903 to 1908, we would make models A, B, C, F, K, R, and S. And at this point, cars were really a rich man's toy, driven by chauffeurs to get their owners around in style and comfort. And this is how our logos evolved over the years to what it is today. And in 1908, I developed the Model T. And this was a real game changer. I'm tired of that word. It reshaped America and even changed your grandparents' life. I wanted to build a car that was reliable, affordable, easy to drive, almost anybody could repair, fun to drive, and was best suited toward quantity production, and she was just that. She was made of vanadium steel. She had 4 cylinders, 20 horses. The cost was between $825 to $950 in a number of different styles. She was 5 feet wide, weighed 1,200 to 1,500 pounds, and was 83 inches tall. And she had a 10-gallon gas tank capable of getting about 16 mpg in the city. She also, besides the gas tank, she's also able to go about 40 mph. But remember, in the low 30s, what the roads could handle. If you could find any, they were made of paved brick. The corners were squared, not rounded. The first stoplights didn't come online to the late teens, the yellow light not until 1925, and there were no traffic cops around. So, and the driver's license weren't invented until the 1930s, and the first DMV came up in 1939. And when that occurred, the Catholic Church had a conniption fit and claimed it to be the only source of damnation and evil in the world. So, it came in different styles, like I said, and sales took off immediately, thousands of them per year. And so in order to increase production, I was inspired by the assembly line process used in making sewing machines, used in making firearms, used in animal slaughterhouses in the Midwest to divvy up and disseminate animal carcasses, as well as how grain was taken in and out of silos. And it took me 5 years to put this together, and I finally did in the Highland Park location, which is just north of Detroit. And my assembly line process moved slowly. It was waist high, generally speaking, and 84 steps were needed to make the Model T. And once again, the sales really increased doing this. And the assembly line process is the work moves and the workers stay put. Each person does a small task, when then it's moved on to somebody else, it's added and added on until it becomes a finished product. This was spoofed and made fun of with Charlie Chaplin's Modern Times, with Lucy and Ethel making chocolates in a chocolate factory, and Ray Kroc took this idea to make 100 billion hamburgers. And the assembly line workers add parts to a product that moves along the belt from one station to the next. The worker does his work repetitively all day long, and the division of labor made production faster and cheaper, lowering the price of goods. So, what once took 720 minutes, that is over 12 hours, to make one car, we got this down to 93 minutes. By 1920, 1 out of 2 cars was a Model T. By 1927, there were 15 million Model Ts on the road. And this is also because of interchangeable parts. All Model Ts had the same gas tank, the same tires, the same engine, and just a few fluctuations into different styles made this all possible. There was a continuous flow of product, the division of labor, and this reduced wasted effort and made things more efficient. And let's talk about the assembly line. Sometimes you just needed the parts right below you to put in these right here. Other times you needed co-assemblers with you to help make the product. People set up, clean up, and to help out. And we got the chassis online using gravity slides that we slid down, and they were supplied by the Dodge brothers, who are not only major stockholders in my company, but they offered the chassis also to the cars. And sales increased along the way. 1911, 55,000 cars. 1912, about 78,000. 1913, well over 100,000. When I put the assembly line process in and took off from there. And this is one that looks like broken down. So at this point, I'll bet you think I'm one of those boring industrialists from the 20th century. Everything's in black and white. My cars look like funeral cars. And you're probably saying, well, what does this have to do with me at all? Well, let's find out. We used to have 9-hour shifts, and I made that into 3 8-hour shifts, Monday through Friday. And it was how you got your 8-hour working day. And I had my workers, I encouraged them to buy Ford cars and had them take the weekend off to tool around in those cars, which is exactly what you did raising your family 30 and 40 years ago, the weekend being the highlight of your week, many of you being weekend warriors. And therefore, I created the weekend. Also, to encourage workers that were loyal, steady, and dedicated, I raised their pay from $2.34 a day to $5 a day. This made me a working class hero and a humanitarian. You see, paying good wages is not charity at all. It's the best kind of business. And this was called profit sharing. I put $10 million in my own money into this, right back into my employees' pockets. And workers came by the thousands to come to my plants. And this was good pay for a factory worker, and especially if you're mechanically inclined. These people are making axles right here, for instance. And the price of the car lowered as the time went on. And we even had a delivery van here for $700. It was a cross between a Federal Express truck and a UPS truck. So we called it the Fed Up Van. Okay, so unions did not create weekends, the 8-hour workday, living wage, the 5-day work week. I did. And I did that to be competitive, and with capitalism and competitiveness, this is how this started. So I'm the one who created this. This is what they mean by changing shifts, and that's what the scene looked like back in the day. And we made our 10 millionth Model T, our 15 millionth, and our 20th million. And the price of the car dropped to under $300. So I'll ask you guys a direct question. When was the last time you had a job where your hours decreased, your pay increased, and the commodity you needed most in life, a car, went down in price by 2/3? It never did happen and never will happen. but it happened under me. The Model T became the best-selling car until the Volkswagen Beetle. Currently, the best-selling car now is the Toyota Corolla, over decades, 43 million units. Second best-selling car is the Ford F-Series truck, and at 40 million units over decades, and then the Volkswagen Golf. The Model T changed the very nature of our society. That is, what was once a slow-paced, pokey, rural, agrarian, horse and buggy type society, within 20 years became a fast-paced, mechanized, modernized society on the go. And with that, there were some costs to being an employee with me. You're eligible for this pay after 6 months of work. And we also had a sociological department staffed by 200 workers. And a man from this department would come over to your home and go over your budget with you to see if you were living within your means, to see if you were going on the up and up, that there were no uncouth activities going on, that the kids were in school, that you were making regular bank deposits, and that there was no alcohol or liquor on the premises. You see, I'm a teetotaler, vegetarian, and pacifist. So if you're going to be on my team, you need to be Miss or Mr. Clean. So if you came to work drunk, you're fired. You brought alcohol to work, you're fired. My sociological department also provided financial assistance. These are before and after pictures. If you lived in a shanty-type shack, we would help you upgrade to a home, or even a new lot to help you start out a home. If you lived in an awful-looking apartment, we would help change that into a better-looking one. Remember, fixing things was my business. We also provided a school, an English language school. We know that a lot of your grandparents came from Italy, Germany, Poland, Russia, Romania. We wanted to help them out, so we provided the school with a diploma. We became the business model for other businesses to follow. We were on the cutting edge of things, and with that we made tremendous profits. So with those profits, I plowed them right back in the community. 1915, I founded the Henry Ford Hospital, and this originally had 47 beds. I saw what my mom went through. Our country doctor was miles away and had to get to our home by horseback in all kinds of weather. Currently, the Ford Hospital has 887 beds, has over 1,500 physicians. It's nationally known and accredited. It's Detroit's fifth biggest employer, and we have over 3 dozen hospitals and medical centers in the surrounding metro area. 3 million people come through our doors to get some kind of help per year. Now, Clara and I rented for 15 years, and we finally got our own place called Fairlane, and 3,100 acres by the Rouge River in Dearborn. And we wanted Frank Lloyd Wright to build it, but instead we got this Gothic mansion, because he was in Europe. And it has 56 rooms, and it has its own indoor swimming pool, indoor billiards room, and bowling alley. And this was all built so that our only son, Edsel, would not be corrupted by inner city vices. And Edsel became president when he was 27 years old in 1920. And he was head of the Mercury division, which made the Ford Continental and Zephyr. And here he is here. Many people don't know, we also make tractors. Here he is here with me. We wanted to ease the toil on farmers and get their product to market. Edsel was always egging me on and prodding me to put out more modern, stylish looking cars, which is what younger people do. So, and he finally convinced me in 1927 to dump the Model T for the newer Model A. Edsel worked on this, was instrumental on this car with the sliding gear transmission and improved braking system. This kind of car you would see in many movies about gangsters in the Prohibition time. Here is Edsel with Clara and me. Edsel married a fine woman. They gave us 4 grandchildren. He was a patron of the arts in Detroit and provided a lot of funding. He even funded a polar expedition. And even though he was president of the company, I was still around and in control. Sometimes our visions of the future did not mesh, and I chastised him and humiliate him in public. Sometimes, and so he's a really nice guy, but he didn't have that side of him, that competitive nature about him, because he had everything growing up. I had to claw my way up to the top, and to this day, the car business is a cutthroat business, and you better know what you're doing. More about Edsel in a bit. Here's Clara, and the funny thing about Clara is that she had a battery-operated car. And being an ardent pacifist, I gathered dozens of delegates together, and we took a trip to France on the ship Oscar II in 1915 to try and make negotiations to stop World War I. Well, this was a disaster of a trip. We bickered on the ship about national politics. Influenza broke out on the ship. We got to France, and negotiations broke down immediately, and we had to go back home empty-handed. It was a naive attempt by a businessman to try and solve a world problem, but at least it was a try. I also ran for Senate and lost by 4,000 votes and had them recounted for 2 years. Now the controversy. And I owned a newspaper called the Dearborn Independent, which is the second largest newspaper in America at the time. In that newspaper, which came, by the way, with every Model T you bought, I had an opinion page. And it was written by my ghostwriter, Mr. Cameron. And on this opinion page, I would state my views, which were anti-union, anti-immigrant, and anti-Semitic. So in your day, you would call me a white supremacist. I would even publish tracts about terrible things saying about Jewish people in my paper. Because of this, I was awarded a medal by the Nazi regime in 1938 called the Great Cross of the German Order of Eagle. Hitler called me an inspiration, and I kept a picture of Hitler on my desk, and he kept one of me on his desk. This medal was given to a foreigner who exemplified Nazi ideals. So, with these kind of views that I would have, which are vile, disgusting, and not in accordance that I had about Jewish people, are disgusting and not in accordance with any local, state, or national standards, I still have them. And because of that, you would think that I'd be sued by slander by somebody. It was just the other way around. I sued the Chicago Tribune for slander. They called me an ignorant anarchist. So when we went to trial, the Tribune lawyer got me on the stand and quizzed me about world history, about United States history. But I didn't know anything about it. I didn't know when the American Revolution was fought, any of our founding fathers. Well, I knew nothing about that. I thought that Lincoln was killed by a Jewish conspiracy and a cabal. And I didn't know anything about world geography. In essence, I made a fool of myself. However, I did win the lawsuit, and I was awarded $1 in compensatory damages. So, a lot of people didn't feel good about my association like this and my viewpoints, and to this day, a lot of people are uncomfortable with talking about me and this subject. Later on, I recanted my ideas and my poisonous remarks about Jewish people. Getting on to brighter things, my factories were designed by Albert Kahn. He had a very large staff of dozens of draftsmen, and he made the Highland Park plan, for instance. You can see right here, long windows, hundreds of yards long, letting a lot of light in, that were made for production of cars. Mr. Kahn actually designed 1 out of 6 factories in the United States in the 1930s and 40s, even went to Stalinist Russia and built factories for them, which is how Russia became a superpower because of the factories he designed. And these are some of the Highland Park plant, by the way, is just north of Detroit. And here's I'll get you on-scene views of this. And at one time in the 1950s, Detroit had a population of over 1.8 million people, Detroit proper. Currently, its population is 650,000. It is currently it is a Rust Belt city that kind of looks like this in many ways. But at the Rouge River plant in Detroit, we tried a new idea. We tried an idea where we would get raw products and send it down the Rouge River on barges. Raw products like taconite, which is the iron ore found in the Minnesota Iron Ranges, and bring that in to our plant. We'd also get coke and coal to come in. We bought whole forests and brought in timber. We bought in raw rubber and oak and every kind of thing you can imagine to help build our cars, and we built our cars then from scratch. And this is called vertical integration, building a car, building anything from scratch, turning it into a finished product, and delivering it. We were tired of waiting for middlemen and other people delaying our costs. And I understand in your day you have problems with this too, supply chain demands. And how's that going for you? Not too good, huh? Yeah. Well, we decided to just take control and do this. Remember, my life is about risk and taking control. So we got that done there. In order to power everything, we had a power plant, which helped out. Supplied 1/3 of all Dearborn's power. And this is what it looked like, the scene at the times. And over time, cars would become more sleek and exemplify the owners that own them. And Cond also designed sales offices like this. We had to have large sales offices to coordinate sales for national sales being on the radio and in print. And we also had to have sales offices all around the country. So they needed to be supplied by salesmen and also by accounting clerks. We needed a whole setup here, as well as other car companies needed that too. And we had a whole secondary chain. The car industry invented a whole secondary chain and even an aftermarket. We had to get our cars out to the market. In your day, they used car haulers, but in our day, our cars were made in parts and sent in great crates by train to the sales offices, like in Baton Rouge or in Baton Rouge, maybe Tacoma, Washington, or Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. There was really one location that was really far and remote. I believe they call that Fenny. So we had to have the supply industry to do that. And plus we needed to have workers come in and clean our factories. And when machines break down, we had to get help with that. We had to employ thousands of people just to make this whole process work out. We had to employ advertisers for local situations too, for local sales and local products being made. That is sales for our cars. And we also had the car industry also was able to put out these concept cars, which we were first to do. In your day, they used CAD machines, CAD computers to do this, CAD programs. But in our day, in order to get the concept car of the future, we used a giant block of clay, which we molded to make the car look this way. And we also had an aftermarket, which is now today. Every car needs consumables, like oils, filters, mats in the car, specifically those situations where consumables like brake pads and tires is worth tens of billions of dollars. So the car company invented these things and employed tens of thousands of people throughout the country to do that. I also did something else in terms of I introduced the Ford Flivver, which is a single-seat airplane designed to be mass-produced as an everyman's aircraft. After a fatal crash of the prototype, one of my workers was killed doing it. I halted production plans. So we got a bit involved in aviation, and more so later on, mainly making the engines. I also had a Henry Ford Museum, or Greenfield Village, which is in Dearborn. This is sits on a couple hundred acres, and it really is a recreation of a town that Clara used to live in around the 1860s. And it's a family-oriented place, kind of like going back to colonial Williamsburg, but a bit more updated. And here you can take locomotive rides, see how people lived back in the day, and even see my company, go on horse-drawn carriages, on covered bridges, and even there's a reproduction of Independence Hall, and there were actors recreating to be blacksmiths, coopers, and farmers. Ironically, the small town atmosphere that I loved so much and promoted so much was really destroyed by the car that I helped promote. Now, cities are just interconnected nests all together. You go from the villages to Leesburg, you will see the blight on the road going out there. And in order to make things run smoothly, I hired Harry Bennett, who was a sailor, former boxer, with underworld connections, and he became America's most notorious thug. Him and his men would work in the personnel department. His men were former gang members, football players, wrestlers, and if you filed suit against me or my company, well, him and his men would show up at your door with baseball bats and politely ask you not to file suit. But him and his men were mainly there to ward off any people coming in, or union organizers coming in our plant premises, coming out there. And this was the age of the rise of unions in the 1930s and 40s. Workers wanted better working conditions, they wanted better pay, and a seat at the bargaining table. Well, there was no need to have that in my facilities. Workers had everything they wanted. No company's gonna come into mind and tell me how to run it. No way. Everything's fine. If you have a problem, just go to your supervisor. Him or her will tell you how to help you out. And terrible things can happen when unions come in. They go on strike, and then nobody works at all. On the other hand, from the workers' point of view, sometimes there were speed-ups on the line in order to increase production. And after 3 weeks of doing this, the men would get frazzled and sometimes return to violence. And this whole idea came to a head in the Battle of the Overpass in 1937. Some men were passing out pro-union leaflets near an overpass by our plant. Harry and his men showed up, and the press was there to take pictures, and a bloody battle ensued. And this is what happened. Nobody wants to deal with Harry and his men. And this was enshrined in a labor museum about the bloody aftermath, and I wasn't kidding about the baseball bats. Moving on to other things. About what happened here, I'm sorry. I finally gave in 1941, and the workers were unionized with the UAW. Actually, Clara threatened to leave me because I wasn't supporting Edsel and his ideas. So I gave in. And we also, during wartime, actually by 1940s, we had sold 29 million autos, and when World War II came, our plants were used in the War Production Act to make weapons of war. At the Willow Run plant alone, 8,000 4-mortar B-24 Liberator bombers were made. Made one every hour. Yes, 42,000 employees turned one out every hour, like I said. In other plants, we produced tanks, destroyers, tank destroyers, jeeps, amphibious jeeps, transport gliders, trucks, engines, and other equipment in our forces. Over 200,000 men worked in my factories in wartime to supply them with necessary products. Without these bombers, we couldn't have carpet bombed Germany to win the war. So I was very proud of that. So, moving on to other things, there's a Henry Ford Elementary School, there's a Henry Ford College. Here I am in Edsel with his 4 children, which turned into some of them CEOs of Ford during the 50s and 60s. And they had kids, and they had kids. Now, Edsel and all this turned out to be a tragic figure. My only son, Edsel, died before me in 1943, 4 years before me. He died of stomach cancer at age 50. And I was not only sad about this, I didn't know who to leave my fortune to. I was worth $200 billion in your money. So I decided to leave it to Harry Bennett. After all, I know him for 20 years. He was my surrogate son and my personal terminator. If I snapped my fingers, the job would get done. no question, and with full force. So about a year after this, my family found out about it, and I created a holy tsunami. And I then gave control and my fortune to my grandkids. In 1957, 10 years after my death, we named a car after Edsel. This needs to be talked about, called the Edsel. And this turned out to be the world's worst marketing disaster. No one liked it because we put it out during a recession, and people, for some reason, didn't like the grill work. It had to be redesigned twice. Our company put $200 million into it, and it didn't sell. It became a national joke because of this, and an embarrassment for decades, and Edsel's name became synonymous with failure and utter marketing disaster. So, but one thing, besides doing all these things in his life, Edsel also, in 1937, put money down for the Ford Foundation. I put $25,000 down. And this foundation is a philanthropic organization that helps causes worldwide. Currently, we have an office in New York City with this wonderful atrium building. It has current assets, the foundation, of $17 billion. And we are able to give about $600 million in grants to organizations that apply worldwide. We want to be on the cutting edge of social change and a dynamic change also. So that's where we put our money. We have about 1% actually get in, but what's given is we've been able to help out writers groups. We even helped out Sesame Street getting started. We started to fight AIDS in the 1980s. We promoted theater groups, in vitro fertilization in the UK, and even wells in sub-Saharan Africa so they could drink clean water. We promoted elderly care with these grants, and even given money to PBS and NPR. And if you listen closely on their credits, you will see the Ford Foundation being proclaimed because of this. And this comes from my ideals, my idealism that I had of promoting these ideas, and it stayed with my family. And I'm very proud of this. We're able to give this kind of hundreds of millions of dollars every year to wonderful organizations that change people's lives. Lastly, I was friends with Thomas Edison for decades. I considered him my hero and my mentor. Did you know that he had 1,038 patents? That's how smart the guy was. And we would go, here I am dealing with him. Every summer we would take these long vacation trips. We would have about a dozen cars out in the wilderness in America and go fishing and hiking. And every year we went with Harvey Firestone, myself, and Edison. And sometimes, quite often, we'd be in a car and we'd sing sometimes. And one of the songs went like this: on a dark desert highway, cool wind in my hair, with the warm smell of pine trees rising up in the air. And I guess you call that song Hotel Cauliflower? Anyways, so he bought land in Fort Myers, and I was his neighbor. Later on, Edison got severe diabetes in the 1930s, had to be in a wheelchair, and sometimes we'd have wheelchair races to make him feel better. He rolled his last breath to me in a test tube, and it was given to me. That's how close we were. A wonderful man. And I actually, in Greenfield Village, duplicated his laboratory here right down to his test tubes that he had. And in the late 30s and 1940s, I had a series of strokes. And in 1947, at age 43, I had a cerebral hemorrhage from a massive stroke and died. People a mile long, mourners came to visit me. And here I am buried in my cemetery in Detroit. Now at this point, I can give you all kinds of superlatives and adjectives about what I did. You already know them. And you already made up your opinion of me. But one thing I can tell you is we've been around Ford Motor Company for 6 generations. For those generations, I employed hundreds of thousands of people directly making products or indirectly, as we've discussed. And I gave each person a wonderful job. Now there are 80 Ford plants all over the world. United States, in Canada, in Ontario is a big one, and in Europe, and in Asia. And there are dozens of plants for every generation that worked at my plant. It worked for me. So I gave all these people here, and this is just one plant. You can multiply this by hundreds now over the generations. I gave each of these people a chance, a shot at the American dream. I gave them all a wonderful chance to be able to be employed, to maybe buy a house, maybe raise a family. And I believe, just have a good time. And I believe that's what we all live for the American dream. And thank you. That is the end of my presentation. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Greg. Since we have so